Hi, it's Mike McLoone and this is Studio Wizards. I wanted to talk a little bit about compression. So the simple question of what is compression in music. This is a pretty versatile tool that we have in the studio arsenal. It's probably one of the most misunderstood and misused tools around, because it's so versatile, because there's so many things you can do with it, so many jobs that you can accomplish. It takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of time and effort invested to fully grasp what you're doing when you are using a compressor. The other thing is you have to have monitoring that's going to be able to actually let you hear what you're doing, but that's a different topic than this. So basically, a compressor is a dynamics processor. That means that it affects the amplitude or volume of sound, not the frequency domain so much, although there is a certain amount of distortion that some compressors that will bring in, but that's a much more subtle thing than the amplitude. So the most basic application of a compressor is in mixing to control some of the dynamics, some of the loudness changes in a sound so that it's more easily placed in the mix and it stays in that location in terms of volume, which actually means then the presence. So the mixing engineer doesn't have to continuously ride the fader and change the volume of that element during the entire track in order to make it sound even or sound like it's in the right place. So in a way, what you're doing is you're taking out some of the dynamic range of that sound. So if done incorrectly, it means that you're actually damaging the sound, because the music or whatever track it is, if it's a vocal or a bass guitar, whatever, part of the energy is in having the dynamic range. So if you remove that dynamic range and you flatten it completely with too much compression, you'll remove the energy of the actual performance and even the notes themselves. So it's important to keep a track on the metering when you're using a compressor, see how much gain reduction you're actually adding, and be able to listen for this as well. And you'll get slowly into the ballpark of being able to actually recognize when it's too much, when it's sucking too much, or when it's ruining that dynamic range. So the simple aspect of, say, leveling a sound to make it a bit more full or even, to be able to be mixed more easily, you're not going to do massive gain reduction. You might be doing 3 or 4 dB, maybe up to 9 or 10 in absolute maximum kind of cases of gain reduction. But somewhere, generally, you're looking at something like between, let's say 3 and 5 dB of gain reduction. Not much more, unless you have a very specific application and you know exactly what you're doing. I would say stick to pretty low gain reduction just for the beginning. One of the most important aspects is the attack. So if the attack on the compressor is too short, too fast, it sounds like a good thing to have a fast attack, but in fact with a compressor, the attack must be slow enough that the compressor isn't trying to pull down the very beginning, the initial attack of the sound of the transient. The problem is if your compressor is acting too fast and there is a threshold, so that every time the sound goes above this threshold, it's actually bringing the sound down. If the attack is too short, it means that the compressor will pounce on that sound as soon as it triggers, which may destroy the transient or the beginning, the initial attack of the sound. And the attack of the sound is actually one of the most important parts of the sound. So if the attack on a compressor is too short, if it's too fast, and it's pouncing on the initial transient of the sound, you can actually take the energy out of it, especially important in dance music. When you want something to come right through in the mix, you want it to be very present and upfront. So setting an attack of, let's say, less than 20 milliseconds is only if you really know that you want it to act that quickly. you're better off if you are just starting out using a tack of something like 30, 40, maybe 40 milliseconds, and then at least the initial transient is going to come through. It completely depends on the application. So it depends on what you're trying to do with the compressor. It depends on the source material. So it just as a general ballpark, I would start off, if you're doing a kick drum or something like this, you might do 20 milliseconds or less. If you're doing most other things, you start off with like 30, 40 milliseconds a tack.